What is something that happened in history that if it happened in a movie, people would call plot hole? Matthias Gallus, the destroyer of armies. In 1637 he ordered his army to march into a wasteland with no food, and most of his soldiers starved to death. In 1638, he took command of another army and marched into the same wasteland, and they starved to death again. The movie writers obviously didn't proofread their script. Are we supposed to believe that anyone would be stupid enough to walk into the same disaster twice? It's annoying how the whole blimp thing just got dropped by the writers. 1919. Everyone is into blimps. Blimps can fly super high, much higher than planes. AA guns can't shoot them down. Planes can't shoot them down. They can even drop planes off of them like an aircraft carrier. Nations establish strategic helium supplies for the Great War of the Blimps, and 1939 comes around. Nothing. Zip. Nada. What the heck? Did they fire the showrunner or something? I'm sure the leaders of England, Germany and Russia just happened to be cousins in this Great War. They just made that up so they could use the same actor to play both King George V and Tsar Nicholas II. Not strictly a plot hole, but I'd probably choose the two Mongol invasions of Japan that were stopped both times by typhoons. Can't think of a more Deus Ex Machina moment than that. And to top it off, it happened twice. Napoleon's escape from Elba. Titanic would be considered lazy writing. The worst maritime accident at the time, and it happened with what was billed as the first unsinkable ship out on its maiden voyage. Tycho Brahe's life. It's like a child wrote it. He lost part of his nose in a duel about a mathematical formula, and wore a brass nose around for the rest of his life. He hired a dwarf named Jep to be his assistant pet because he thought Jep was a psychic. Jep lived under the dining room table. He had a pet moose that got too drunk at one of his 16th century rages and died from falling downstairs. Tycho died of a ruptured bladder from holding his pee for too long. Rumor is he didn't want to be rude and get up from the table during a dinner with the King of Hungary to pee. And after all that, Johannes Kepler got credit for his work in astrophysics. Edit. 16th century. The Cambrian explosion. We have a perfect fossil record of nothing but algae. Then one day the fossil record includes fully evolved animal life. That one time when an army went to battle with 80 troops and came back with 81. Script supervisor missed that one. I'm at work and refused to look up details and facts. A lone Soviet tank holding an entire German division for one day in the Battle of Rasinae in 1941. From Between Giants, the battle for the Baltics in World War II. More than a KV-1 or KV-2 tank. Accounts vary. Advanced far behind the German lines after attacking a column of German trucks. The tank stopped on a road across soft ground and was engaged by 450mm anti-tank guns of the 6th Panzer Division Anti-Tank Battalion. The tank was hit several times but fired back, disabling all 4 guns. A heavy 88mm gun of the Divisional Anti-Aircraft Battalion was moved about 730 meters, 800 did, behind the tank but was knocked out by the tank before it could score a hit. During the night, German combat engineers tried to destroy the tank with satchel charges but failed despite possibly damaging the tracks. Early on the morning of the 25th of June, German tanks fired on the KV from the woodland while an 88mm gun fired at the tank from its rear. Of several shots fired, only 2 penetrated the tank. German infantry advanced and the KV opening machine gun fire against them, and the tank was knocked out by grenades thrown into the hatches. According to some accounts, the crew was buried by the German soldiers with full military honors. In other accounts, the crew escaped during the night. Literally everything Hannibal put his mind to. Not a plot hole, but after surviving so many ways of killing him, we would be saying that Rasputin had some pretty thick plot armor. German intelligence and counterintelligence during World War II. Nobody could be that stupid constantly. The Dunkirk evacuation would be an eye-rolling example of, and of course the good guys' friends come galloping in at the last minute to save the seemingly doomed heroes. I'm pretty sure it was during the French Revolution that a cavalry regiment won a naval battle because the ships had frozen into the harbor. Seems that a lot of people don't know what a plot hole is. Chemist Fritz Haber's dubious contribution to 20th century history. Imperial Germany in World War I was heavily blockaded and needed a way of synthesizing ammonia. Haber, a patriotic German, solved that problem, which enabled Germany to continue manufacturing high explosives, the kind they stuffed into artillery shells at Verdun. Then, Haber heads the scientific team that developed chlorine gas, a uniquely awful way of killing people. As if shrapnel wasn't bad enough. So already, our clever pal Fritz is indirectly responsible for millions of deaths. Here's where it gets good. A few years after the armistice, Haber gets into agriculture by developing pesticides. His most famous creation, an agent called Zyklon A. Sound familiar? It's the predecessor to the chemical used to gas Jews in the death camps. Historical note, not all the camps. Treblinka, for example, used carbon monoxide courtesy of a Soviet tank engine. Fritz Haber was a Jew. I don't know whether this character was written as a mad scientist or what. Maybe he's supposed to be a cautionary tale. Something about good intentions. Either way, it's lazy writing and highly improbable stuff and I'm awfully sore about it. Edit. Disclaimer. No one should take my comment as historical fact. I encourage you to read the various comments and sources below. Fritz Haber was a complicated man and his life is worth examining further. Leif Erikson and his exploration and settlement of North America. If European history from the fall of Rome to the Renaissance was a series of movies, when it's time for Columbus and the rest of the conquistadors, people would be saying, are they going to pretend that the scenes in Vinland at the end of Part I never happened, and an entire civilization just sort of forgot about North America? It'd be like the Knights of Ren. Only worse. The Korean War. How can the most powerful army on the planet get close to winning a war, then get pushed back by another powerful nation and just leave the war running in the background in some unstable ceasefire for 60 years? Clearly the writers didn't realize the need to flesh out an ending to this plot point. Everyone goes into battle on horseback, then there's a dumb montage, and all of a sudden tanks. Not a plot hole, but the French showing up to help the Americans is Deus Ex Machina and a cheap writing decision. Here in Brazil, Senator Arnon de Mello shot and killed another senator in the Senate chamber. Guess what happened to him? Nothing. He resumed his political career, and his son, Fernando Collor de Mello, was even elected president. The Great Emu War. The emus won. Nelson Mandela becoming president after he died. They never really resolved the whole Second Coming story arc. Still holding out for a reboot but losing hope. Alexander the Great's conquests. The man conquered so much of the world before he died and only stopped because his men were tired of him being so awesome at it that they wanted to go home. Then he died at age 32 because if he hadn't he'd have been king of the whole bloody planet before he was 45. It's like they took every good quality of mythological heroes and put it into one being so perfect that fate itself had to spit into his eye to stop him from being so. Okay, I'm not a simpleton. I know in writing that with every new movie or reboot, there has to be rising stakes, but eventually it gets ridiculous. But when you have this glorious struggle for humans to build the first airplane, the first power device to stay in the air, and only do it for 12 seconds, this beautiful struggle of humanity and science, but all you have are a couple of sequels, a fancy reboot, and 66 years later they're putting humans on the moon. They had barely just begun to understand the moon in the 19th century, and they know enough to fly there. We're talking about a human civilization that took over 2000 years to go from bronze to iron, and they go from an unstable 12-second flight to space travel in 66. Inconceivable. Thank God they stopped making sequels. The moon was ridiculous enough, but Mars? Another star? Please, no one would believe that. There's the story of the stolen panel from a van I caught a piece in Ghent, Belgium. It was mysteriously robbed in 1934 from the church, and never been found. There was an exchange of ransom notes with the police, but it came to a halt unexpectedly. A few months after the heist, a stockbroker who suffered from a heart attack confessed on his deathbed that he alone knows the location of the missing painting, and he directed his lawyer to a desk drawer where carbon copies of all the ransom notes have been found, including an unsent letter that contained a clue about the location. And still, No one could figure it out. Only last week, an amateur puzzler announced in a press conference promoting a book he co-written that he figured out the location from that last note, and that it's buried under a cobblestone square in Ghent. It involved cracking the codes, drawing routes on a map. True Da Vinci Code stuff. The authorities are taking it super seriously and are looking into the best way to dig up the square. I truly hope it's there. It would be insane. I mean, the deathbed confession part seems a little excessive. No? Ernest Shackleton and saving the crew of the Endurance. Pretty much the whole story seems like it must be made up. Double quote. So, as I was saying, this kid gets his dad's army of 32,000 and decides he's going to poke the emperor of the largest empire in the world with it. Yada yada yada. Within 3 battles he's completely conquered the empire. Did you just yada yada the conquest of an entire empire? So this other time the local general gets captured after shooting the horse out from under the enemy king. And instead of getting his head cut gets made one of the commanders of the enemy army. Then he hears of this land far away that his king has never heard of, so he asks if he can go see what's there. The king's like, yeah, whatever. Take a few guys and check it out, but don't cause too much trouble and be back before dinner time. And so Sabute took 20,000 riders over to Eastern Europe, decimated and subjugated Persia, Afghanistan, Georgia and a combined Rus and Cuman army 4x their size, and then had lunch on top of their tied up and subsequently crushed to death foes, and is back in Karakoram before his 3-year time span is up. Yeah, okay, like anyone's going to buy this clearly Gary Stu character. White Death. Seriously, what sniper could take out so many bad guys? And the bad guys giving him what is essentially his own superhero name? Ridiculous. Also, Audie Murphy. His exploits in World War II were so insane that moviegoers refused to believe even the toned down version they put in his movie. The English Navy discovered that lemon juice kept scurvy off, used that fact to help establish sea dominance, and then forgot the fact and let scurvy appear again in their ships. You see that in a film and you roll your eyes. They ran out of budget to do the end of World War II, so the writers invented this ridiculous super weapon that ends the war with 2 swift strikes. Then, despite getting into a lot more wars after that, the super weapon is never used to win them. The fact that the US was ready to convert to the metric system, but due to the wording of the Metric Act, it wasn't a requirement and the US gave up on trying to convert. There was a whole metric board and everything, but due to the wording of voluntary everyone gave up on it. The Bronze Age collapse. There is no one that truly knows what happened. At least 3 major civilizations collapsed, one of them being the most ancient throughout all of history, being Egypt. They all had writing which they regularly used, but the only evidence from writing is of a mysterious people called the Sea People. There are multiple theories involving sickness, rebellions and disasters. These empires should not have collapsed, at least not without major writing. Edit. Watch this series, buy extra credits for more. It's amazing. Using the Germans as the bad guys for World War II is way too cliche, and of course the main villain has a weird mustache. At least he didn't have a big scar over his eye. D-Day. A few days of perfect weather before one of the worst sea storms of the year saved the landings. The German Panzer divisions aren't deployed in time because they didn't want to wake Hitler up. The local general, Erwin Rommel, was at home away from the front to celebrate his wife's birthday. That's on top of the Germans eating up the Allied deception hook, line and sinker. In the first Henry VI film, he marries a foreign princess for political reasons, then divorces her for a much younger, wilder, female member of his staff. She then ends up being too wild and he has her executed, and marries a gentle, honest woman until they are parted by death. The sequel film had the exact same plot. Spanish Admiral Blas de Lezo, 1689-1741. His career is just completely unbelievable. After losing one leg, one arm and one eye in several previous wars, and surviving all that related surgery without antibiotics, they were just not discovered yet. He managed to beat the second largest naval army in world history, and the biggest one created by a single nation, with an army composed by 6 ships, 1,780 regular soldiers, 500 militia, 600 American native bowmen, 150 men from the 6 ship's crew. With that he battled and won. 180 British ships, 30,000 British soldiers. The battle was so clearly on English favour that his commandant ordered one of the ship to return to England, proclaiming victory before the attack started. Coins were forged with the surrendering of Blas the Lezo, although they had to be destroyed later. Long story short, Blase sunk his own ships to block the entrance of English ships into the peninsula, forcing them to maneuver in narrow waters, then defended cleverly all the in-between forts for earning time. He used the time to dig 1 meter just beneath the walls of the last fortress. When Brissith attacked last fortress, the ladders they had prepared for climbing it were 1 meter short, so they couldn't take the last garrison. After British suffering around 4,500 casualties, 6 sunken ships and 17 to 20 heavily damaged ships. With the arrival of heavy rains in the area, they withdraw from the attack and retreated. There is only one bigger naval army gathered in history, and it is the Normandy Allied fleet during Second World War. The fact that the 2, arguably, most famous, and extremely rare, female pirates sailed on the same ship, and neither knew the other was a chick until the male disguised and Bonnie confessed she was a lady because she fancied a certain pirate, only to have that certain pirate reveal that he was actually Mary Read, also a lady in disguise. Seriously? 2 females successfully living as males on a pirate ship? No one noticed? Also, nice idea to have strong female leads, but the writers really undermined that by making their whole plot revolve around a crush and Anne's relationship with the captain. Also, when they were finally caught, they both happened to be pregnant and pleaded the belly to avoid hanging with the rest of the crew. How did they both get conveniently knocked up right before getting arrested? Super lazy plot holes. Yeah, I'm sure that some random Russian sorcerer was just naturally immune to poison, bullets, knives, and fists for no reason. I get that every story needs a great villain, and Rasputin was pretty good there for a while, until the writers just completely ruined it by writing the most over-the-top death scene ever and never even bothering to explain it. US nuclear weapon development during World War II. It is almost impossible to believe that the US was able to hide development of a bomb that could destroy entire cities when thousands of people worked on the project and a nuke was detonated during testing. Edit. Only 1 nuke was detonated during testing before it was used against Japan. Mark Aurels, the nice old guy from Gladiator, later years. Dude who has never been out of Rome becomes emperor. Instead of having his military proficient adoptive brother Lucius Verus killed, he makes him co-emperor and puts him in charge of campaigns. Mark Aurel meanwhile stays in Rome, pushes social reforms and thinks about philosophy real hard. At some point the Germanic tribes get so rowdy, both emperors have to go north to deal with them. Only on the way there, Lucius Verus dies of a heart attack. So this guy with no military experience or connection to his soldiers spends the last 10 years of his life in a military camp in what's today's rainiest Germany, being a so-so leader and inventing a whole new level of stoicism. In a show, I'd assume the actor of Lucius Verus got fired and they had to write him out real quick. It happens on the 15th of April, and musicians die at 27. Not a plot hole, but bad writing. That we sent people to the North Pole and other really cold places just to have them die and then kept sending people until they didn't die. Although the Emperor Constantius I had his family killed and was often humiliating him, Julian stayed faithful to the Emperor, constantly writing letters, even books to praise him. Surprisingly, he won victories after victories in Gaul and Germany, and the Emperor, fearing that he would rebel against him, decided to remove his best men from him and transfer them to the Eastern armies. Even then it is reported that he wanted to stay faithful to the Emperor, but his army forced him to take arms and not accept this last blow. Thus the 2 men marched against each other. However, Constantius died on the way from illness and Julian was selected as his successor in his will. This happens around 360. The weathering and erosion on the Sphinx at Giza. If movies showed Roman and Greek statues painted and not white marble like they were real, it would look so fake. We have become so used to our idea of the past that we can no longer imagine reality. So you're telling me this guy just went nuts and fortified a bulldozer into an impenetrable tank he called the Killdozer? Get the duck out of here. Tommy Wiseau. Just him in general. Dude supposedly has no backstory and we had no idea how he got the money to fund the room. He's a living, breathing plot hole. Oh, it just so happened that the British didn't receive letter than the war should have ended. So they had to make the Battle of New Orleans happen. Ooh, I've been waiting to tell this one. A long time ago there was a general, whose name I conveniently forgot, who was extremely skilled in warfare and always had traps laid out. He was known and respected for being extremely clever. Unfortunately for him, a neighboring country decided to invade and took him completely by surprise. He was severely outnumbered and the neighboring army was literally outside his castle doorstep. They didn't know what to do and the enemy was posted waiting for them to fight and lose or surrender. So, amidst the chaos and despair, he decides duck it and opens the doors and sits up on the top of the castle and eggs them on. The enemy packed up and left without so much as firing a single arrow. You see, his reputation for being clever and sneaky saved them that day. The enemy general decides that it looks too much like a trap, so they packed up and left without engaging. Just want to give you props, OP, for one of the most original AskReddit questions I've seen. Butterflies essentially evolved twice, 50 million years before the butterflies we have today evolved. A completely separate species that was basically identical went extinct. Talk about reusing ideas. I was in a class where we watched old western films. People complained about the cheesy ricochet sound of the bullet twang. No one realized that sound is real. Basically every genocide ever. So you're telling me that a maniac is killing millions of people and the rest of the world doesn't band together immediately to stop it? Trump being elected is a huge one to me. Not trying to go political, but consider this. 1. Hugely popular in Texas. In the 80s I clearly remember a commercial for barbecue sauce that involved cowboys figuring out their chef was using sauce from NY. It ended with osage at a rope. Texans typically aren't into major players from a city, especially NY. 2. He's elitist as hell. My friends from the south used to be outraged when someone from the east would flaunt their wealth and education. Not in Trump's case. It somehow makes him endearing. Blows my mind. If it had been written in a book in 2014 I would have thought it way too far-fetched. 1. Avoiding the Cuban Missile Crisis. 2. Boris Yeltsin single-handedly not blowing up the world after it was reported to him that the US fired nukes at Russia. We didn't, obviously. Both scenarios involved Deus Ex Machina and or characters acting counter to their established traits. In 1941, Rudolf Hess of the Nazi High Command secretly flew to England, without Hitler's approval or knowledge, to open peace negotiations with an aristocrat he had never communicated with. Hess crashed his plane in Scotland and was detained by a farmer until his arrest by some dad's army types. The president of France, who fell out of a train in the middle of the night, wandered to someone's house, knocked on the door, said I'm the president. But the guy didn't recognize him. They didn't have TV at the time, until the guy's wife saw his face on a coin. That the assassin of Franz Ferdinand just happened to stop for lunch at a sandwich shop that the Archduke's motorcade just happened to drive past. General Patton, one of the most historically successful US commanders, as well as one of the most loved generals of the war, defeats the most evil force to ever threaten the planet. Then he dies due to a car accident immediately after.